What do you think of when you hear the phrase confined space? Do you work in or around confined spaces? Can you identify potential hazards in these areas? And do you know how to respond to emergency situations? You may be unaware that you're working near or around a confined space, let alone the one that requires a permit before work can begin. Under OSHA's Permit-Required Confined Spaces standard, an employer must evaluate a workplace to determine classification as permit-required confined spaces and put into place precautions and safety plans. Assume a space is permit-required until determined otherwise. Remember that safety is everyone's responsibility, but liability falls on the employer. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that well over 100 fatal injuries occur involving confined spaces each year. These incidents involve tanks, bins, ditches, trenches, mines, tunnels, manholes, pits, crawl spaces, wells, and other hazardous structures. Most heavily hit are construction laborers, followed closely by farm workers, on-site construction supervisors, plumbers, those involved in the trucking industry, and general maintenance and repair workers. Granted, not all confined spaces carry the same risks. For this reason, OSHA has outlined the characteristics of a work site where a permit is required. A confined space is one where the space is large enough for an employee to enter bodily and perform the assigned work, has limited or restricted means of entry or exit, and is not designed for continuous employee occupancy. The second point on limited entry or exit is most ambiguous. Any circumstance that might hinder escape or rescue could qualify. If someone needs to crawl, access a space using limited or temporary means, such as a ladder, squeeze, bend or hunch, or travel a great distance to leave the space, escape or rescue is made more difficult. To determine whether a confined space is classified as permit required, the space contains or has the potential to contain a hazardous atmosphere, or contains a material that has the potential for engulfing an entrant, or poses a trap or asphyxiation hazard due to inwardly converging walls, or a downward sloping floor tapering to a smaller cross section, or contains any other recognized serious safety or health hazard. The fourth characteristic is site and task specific, but is roughly defined as the controlled of hazardous energy. Appendix A of Standard 1910.146 provides insight into safe working procedures for confined spaces. This flowchart offers a look at the full spectrum of workplaces, from those where no confined spaces exist, to sites where all entrants must be immediately removed and any permits become void. This resource should be used to lay out a safety program for all environments before work begins, and that permit program and the resulting training and signage must remain in place as long as the permitted conditions persist. Basic actions include posting of signage and erecting barricades, communicating with potential entrants, and conducting appropriate tests on the site. The ability to identify potential hazards is key. What are some examples of confined space hazards? Consider a simple confined space, like a large fluid storage tank that has been drained for repair. Although standard safety practices for OSHA's Fatal 4, which include falls, electrocution, caught in, and struck by, will stand poor ventilation, means of egress and rescue, decreased visibility and access to others, and the potential for entrapment compound these hazards. Caught in suddenly expands into new concerns like mechanical, engulfment, and atmospheric issues. Examples of atmospheric issues include asphyxiation and inerting, suffocation, toxicity, flammability, acidity, and heat buildup. Some tasks such as welding, soldering, cutting, and brazing may also require a hot work permit. Thinking back to our drained fluid storage tank, before entry we have already gone through the confined space checklist. But is this confined space one where a permit must be obtained from the project coordinator for entry? You decide. As a reminder, if any one of the following scenarios are true, a permit is required. The space contains or potentially will contain hazardous atmosphere, or has the potential to engulf an entrant, or there is a trap or asphyxiation hazard such as converging walls, or a downward sloping floor leading to a narrow cross-section, or there is some other recognized safety health hazard, or often categorized as hazardous energy. The project coordinator must identify all potential hazards and list them out on the permit before authorizing entry. Refer to OSHA.gov for examples of confined space entry permits that can be adapted to your site and organization. Any entry permit is simply a document the employer provides that defines, authorizes, and controls entry into the space. Once issued by the employer, entry is permitted for the trained and authorized personnel. Entry by definition occurs once any part of the entrance body breaks the plane of an opening into the space. If a workplace does contain permit spaces, the employer must inform exposed employees by posting danger signs or through some equally effective means. Some hazard identification requires testing. These are specific air quality limits and guidance on safety obtaining data to which a permit program must adhere. Alternate entry procedures may also exist in certain environments. Bear in mind that control of atmospheric hazards through forced air ventilation does not constitute elimination or of insulation from those hazards. Personal protective equipment such as self-contained breathing apparatuses may be required in a space. Confined spaces may necessitate full equipment, fire suppression equipment, and any other applicable safety gear and precautions. Each scenario and potential hazard may have its own permissible limits and safety equipment requirements. So what is your role in all of this? In general, there are a few key roles. The supervisor is responsible for conducting elevations, preventing injury if required, providing training, provide PPE and other equipment, controlling and monitoring hazards, verifying rescue services are available, removing unauthorized individuals, and retaining permit and employee exposure records. The program coordinator issues permits, has general oversight, notifies the supervisor prior to entry, and completes and files relevant documents. An authorized entrant properly uses equipment and gathers atmospheric data. Attendants should be aware of possible behavior effects from hazard exposure, maintain consistent communication with the entrant, inform the supervisor once the entrant has exited the confined space, and remain outside the space until relieved by another attendant. Entrants and attendants share responsibility for knowing the hazards, ensuring all rescue equipment is in their place prior to entry, and signing the permit authorization section to ensure all actions and conditions for safe entry have been performed. A well-trained, practiced, and well-equipped rescue team should always be on hand. One person may cover multiple roles, and other responsibilities may be required. Everyone is responsible for participating in training for all duties they are to perform, and for the following safe work practices, and each participant is responsible for some level of documentation. It is up to the employer to ensure everyone is aware of these responsibilities. For further guidance on Standard 1910.146, go to OSHA.gov. Resources specific to your workplace may be available and should be consulted. Remember that the employees who complete tasks should be involved in the development of any job hazard analysis and safety program. This training introduced you to permit-required confined spaces, associated hazards, and the permitting process. Although permits are issued by the employer rather than a municipality or outside entity, they are no less important or legally relevant. Refer to the full OSHA standard and its appendices for additional guidance.